Another tool for our toolkit is Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. So he was a survivor of the concentration camps. Really for some pretty deep reading. This is pretty deep. I mean, when you survive the experience of a concentration camp, you've got to ask yourself, why am I still here? Statistically, I should be dead. Like my family members and friends and all those other people that I knew in the concentration camp, I shouldn't be here. What is life all about? 6 million people died in these concentration camps. Why am I here? He took to writing about it. How is there meaning in all of this? He says this book that he wrote is not so much concerned with the sufferings of the mighty, those rich and powerful. No. It deals more with the sacrifices, the crucifixion, and the deaths of the great army of unknowns and unrecorded victims. This book is about people like us who suffer. It's not about all these people that we glorify, that we have these big images of. No, let's talk about the suffering in this world. Frankl saw an unrelenting struggle for daily bread and for life itself. Okay, let's tie this back to Maslow, right? Physiological needs need to be met. First things that need to be met. If you're in a concentration camp, you're concerned about survival and food. How am I going to stay alive from day to day? Okay, I better at least make myself look healthy enough that they keep me working. So long as I'm working, there's a better chance that they'll keep me alive. When I'm no longer able to work, bad news, right? They'll dispose of me. So how do I keep myself alive? And part of that is making sure that my needs are met, like eating. And if they're only giving each of us a small loaf of bread every day to do all the work we have to do all day, we have to be thinking about how am I going to survive? And ultimately, whose survival is going to be most important for me? Sorry, it's my own, right? At the end of the day, when they're calling the numbers of the people who are going to the gas chamber, I got news for you. I'm concerned about one number not being called, principally, and that's my own. And if they don't call the numbers of the people beside me, I'm relieved as well. But ultimately, it's our own personal survival that we're often interested in.
Unrelentingly struggles for daily bread, for life itself. Yes, it goes back to the pyramid about food and everything, but couldn't it be also interpreted into an inner religious thing? You know, when we go take the daily bread at the Eucharist, maybe you have to have the daily bread of life itself and spiritually.
I think I like where you're going, because sometimes the nourishment that we get is not just physical bread, but there has to be that thing that keeps us going day after day. I mean, there's got to be, in the concentration camp, there's got to be a point at which some people just lose hope. What am I doing? I'm just going to die anyways. He referred to it as people running into the wire, meaning there are electric wires around the fence. So if I'm going to die eventually, you know what? I prefer to take my own life today. I'm going to run into the wire and electrocute myself today. Presuming I don't choose that route, then there's got to be something that keeps me going. And for most people, that's hope. Why do people commit suicide? We typically say it's because that person has lost hope. A member of my own family recently committed suicide. It's probably the case. We suspect it's because the doctor told him the diabetes is such that your legs are going to have to be amputated. You know, some people are able to say, okay. Other people, wait a minute. Why bother? I do not want to live like this. Viktor Frankl says, every person was controlled by one thought only. What thought controlled us? Keeping ourselves alive. He said, they were prepared to use every means, honest and otherwise, even brutal force, theft, and betrayal of their friends in order to save themselves. Pastoral counseling situations. Always be cognizant of the fact that every person is in this world, every person speaks of I and is interested in that person. How do we help us to overcome our selfish needs? He says, all efforts and all emotions were centered on one task, preserving one's life. He says, we the sheep thought of two things only, how to evade the bad dogs, the SS soldiers, and how to get a little food, essentially how to survive. He talks about how it was that the whole former lives of concentration camp prisoners were erased. Okay, so you were a doctor, you were wealthy, you were whatever. What does that mean when you're in here? You are stripped of everything you ever had. Well, I need to hold on to my wedding ring. Sorry, buddy. Everyone loses every part of their former life. Everyone is stripped naked. Everyone's hair is shorn. I mean, everyone loses who they were. They had nothing except their lives. He says at that point, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. What does that say to us in plain English? It is normal to feel abnormally, to have normal feelings in abnormal situations. That is normal. When people come to us, man, something just happened and it's upsetting my world, praise the Lord, that's normal. What you're going through is not abnormal. He says mental agony and injustice hurt more than physical pain. Think about that for a moment. What sometimes is worse? Is it worse for us to endure the physical pain? Sometimes it's what's going on upstairs, right? What's going on inside our minds. The injustices, where does anger come from? We'll learn. Anger comes from a sense of injustice. Why do I get angry? Because I sense some injustice. He says some prisoners lost hope. We talked about hope already. But he says the incorrigible optimists, they were the most irritating. Right? Says prisoners retreated from their terrible surroundings to inner riches and spiritual freedom. How interesting that now we're going to start talking about this spiritual life. When everything else is taken away, it's almost like there's something beautiful about that, for lack of better words, because suddenly you start focusing on what's most important in life and other realities. And his realization in all of this, love is the ultimate goal. Love is the highest goal. What are we here as human beings for? What's it all about? About love. That was his realization. He said humor was another of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. At one point he talks about how it was that they were rewarded for applauding and for entertaining. I mean, it's sort of, when you're in this situation, how do you help one another through these situations? When we're in these dark situations of life, how do we help one another through those situations? I'm not suggesting that you make light and make humor when people come to you with their problems, but at the same time, there's something about how do we get through those dark moments together? How do we help one another out? Deep words, he said, just as gas fills the entire gas chamber, think about that for a moment. You have a gas chamber, where does the gas go? It fills the whole thing. Your whole entire life is filled with suffering of different sorts. No one should judge unless he or she asks him or herself in absolute honesty whether in a similar situation she might not have done the same. Think about that for a moment. Before you judge another person, be totally honest. If you were that person, you would do that same thing. Okay? So how do we understand why that person did that thing? Because that will tell us a lot about human nature. That person in that situation lied. Okay, I have to be honest. If I were in that situation, I would have lied too. Let me try to understand why that person did that. And we're hypocrites if we think differently. Well, if I were in that situation, I wouldn't have lied. No, if you were that person in that situation who lied, we've talked about this before. Every choice that you make shows that we always choose what we perceive to be best in that situation. Why did that person perceive that to be best? And if you were that person, would you not have seen the world in that same way? There was a strong feeling that fate was one's master, and that one must not try to influence it in any way, but instead let it take its course. Right? It's sort of, as religious people would say, well, it's all in God's hands. That's another way of our talking about fate. Well, if God wants it to be, right? Fate is going to control all these things. Well, if that's God's will. He said the prisoner would have preferred to let fate make the choice for him or her. This escape from commitment was most apparent when a prisoner had to make the decision for or against an escape attempt. Think about that for a moment. they think that there's a way to escape. How many of us here in the concentration camp are going to do it? Follow me? Because right now, we realize in that very moment that you are making your own decision. Follow me? Whether you try to escape or not, that is your decision. They may have taken everything away from you, but there is one thing that you're left with, and that is your freedom to choose. They stripped you naked, shaved off your hair, took everything you had, burned it, but there's one thing they didn't take away from you, and that was your freedom. They're telling us we can escape. Are you choosing to go or not? He tells stories in his book of how it was that there were actually soldiers who did this setup, right? Where they would have plots to escape, where they would say, quick, everyone who's in that truck is going to be able to escape. Everyone would run to that truck, and what happened? Off to whatever death chamber they were sent to. But what Viktor Frankl realized was, you know what? They can strip everything and take everything away from us, but the one thing they can't take away from me is my freedom. I can choose whether I'm going to try to escape or not. I can choose how it is that I'm going to react to this situation. Every human being that comes to us in any situation has that freedom to respond. You can respond to this. I understand this challenge, this problem. I feel bad for you. You are the one who has to choose how it is that you're going to respond to this. He says in those moments, in those minutes when you're tempted to escape and you have to make your own decision, he said in those minutes in which you had to make up your own mind, you suffered the tortures of hell. Because it wasn't someone telling you what you should do. Oh, you should go with them. Okay, I'm going. No, you had to make up your own. You have to make your own choice. You are free to make your own decision. He says, despite terrible conditions and stress, we preserve our spiritual freedom. And the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way, we retain our dignity even in the concentration camp. You can take everything you want away from me. Viktor Frankl says, I am free and you cannot take that away from me. You can spit in my face, I am still free to choose how I'm going to respond to you. He says, suffering, like fate and death, is an ineradicable part of life. Suffering is just part of life. There's no way you can get rid of it. Suffering is part of life. It sounds Buddhist, I know. It says, human life isn't complete without suffering and death. The way we accept fate or suffering adds meaning to life. And isn't that what John Paul II taught us in his suffering and death? Here we had a pope who was going through Parkinson's and all sorts of other infirmities. And you know what? His essential message was, it's through our suffering and how we suffer that brings meaning to our lives. I choose how I'm going to face this suffering. He says emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it. Think about that for a moment. Whatever emotions that person comes to you with, as soon as they understand it, as soon as they have a clear, more precise picture of it, it loses its power. For me, one of the books that we're going to explore in 2 weeks is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goldin. He talks about where anger comes from. I remember reading it as a young man. Why do we get angry? We get angry because we perceive an injustice. You know what? Since then, I just don't get angry as much. Hardly ever. That is to say, okay, when I'm feeling that human feeling that we call anger, I just think to myself, wait a minute, my body is telling me something. I'm perceiving some injustice here. Follow me? Right? I was here with my car in line. That person cut in front of me. When I feel that welling up inside of me, what we call anger, wait a minute, it's my brain hinting that there's an injustice going on. So when I see other people get angry and blow up, it's fascinating. I love watching it when it happens, right? And they walk out and they slam the door. Oh, this is fascinating because it tells us that how this person is perceiving this situation. If he or she is angry, he or she is perceiving an injustice. So when I see that person again, when he or she has cooled down, it gives us something to be able to talk about.
This is why you shouldn't watch the news.
Say more. Say more.
Oh, well, I find and you can ask Joe, I'll be watching the news and see some of the things that are going on, and I'm not going to get into it. And I'm I get angry. I am nasty. I am mean. I am cursing those people out.
So take that deeper, and why are you that way?
Because it's because of injustice. And every time I see anything about injustice, I get that way.
There you go.
But I don't keep it inside. I yell a lot. I ask poor Joe. He's glad he's deaf, actually. He just sits there and looks at me, which is okay. But I rant and rave, and then I'm fine.
So what Frankl is telling us, it goes right into that insight. Our emotions cease to be strong and powerful emotions that cause us suffering as soon as we understand them. You know what? I could be controlled by my anger for the rest of my life. Father Jamie is such a hothead. He gets all upset and he goes out and he slams the door. I could be controlled by my anger for the rest of my life, or I could realize, you know what? As soon as I understand my anger, it's my body's way of telling me there's an injustice going on. And if you cut in front of me in traffic, it's going to signal my body with this thing that we call anger. Oh, it's how it is that I perceive an injustice in this instance. Okay, I understand now. Life goes on. Will I allow my anger and those feelings to hold me hostage, or will I understand them so that when I'm in future situations that are similar to that, I'm not walking out the door and slamming it the next time?
Oh, I don't slam that well sometimes. Sometimes I slam cat. But that's better than anything. or being nasty to people.
Like Elvis Presley.
Could it be a justice?
I'm very good at
Could it be a justice to the injustice that you control your anger, but someone that is angry or angry at you, let's say angry at you, and you don't show your anger?
So I'm not sure if I understand your question, right? But you're onto something, right? You can try to provoke me, right? You are so trying to make me angry, but you know what? At the end of the day, I have the freedom to choose my response. And doesn't that anger people sometimes more? You know, it's like they're just trying to get under your skin, and they're trying to get under your skin. You know
So
what?
isn't that your justice instead of your injustice?
Isn't that something? Right? We talked about hope before. Viktor Frankl says the death rate was highest right after Christmas. Isn't this true even today of persons who die around the holiday season? Many times, for instance, he said, at least in the concentration camp, there were people who had this illusion. They were like, I'm going to be home for Christmas. I'm going to be home for Christmas. I'm going to be home for Christmas. Christmas came. Christmas went. What happened? I didn't get home for Christmas. It's useless. I'm never going home. Follow me? The hope was high leading up to the holidays. After that, boom. Holiday seasons now. Why do so many people die around the holiday seasons, right? Oh my word, the holidays are coming. It's a sad, depressing time. All the families moved off. I'm going to be sad, lonely, depressed. It tells us something about how the human being is and the hope that we hold on to or not. He said, questions about the meaning of life can never be answered by sweeping statements. Life does not mean something vague, but life is something very real and concrete. Just as life's tasks are also very real and concrete. And those real and concrete things of life, they form our destiny. Every word, every action that you have, it forms your destiny, which is different and unique for each individual. Your destiny is shaped by your words and your actions and is different from everyone else's. And so no one and no destiny can be compared with any other person or any other destiny. So don't tell me you know what I'm feeling, because you don't know what I'm feeling. You may have been in similar situations. But you can't compare what you're going through to what I'm going through in a totally exact way. He says, no situation repeats itself, and each situation calls for a different response. What beautiful words for us to be able to understand the human situation, how it is that every person in every situation it's such a unique thing that we can never totally understand that other person in that situation. So how do we help those persons in those situations? Respecting that, rather than saying, oh yeah, I know how you feel. That's too glib a response. You follow me? You really don't know how you feel. No one ever knows exactly how another person feels. And so saying that maybe not the most helpful thing in the world. He says every situation is distinguished by its uniqueness. And everyone who comes to us with whatever challenge they're facing, that is a unique person in a unique situation looking for some help. He says human life under any circumstances never ceases to have a meaning. Life always has a meaning under any circumstances, and that this infinite meaning of life includes suffering and dying, privation, going without things, and death. Suffering and death and dying and going without the things that we need, those all help us to understand the meaning of life. And when you're in a death camp, surrounded by all sorts of people, 6 million people who die, it comes down to helping you think through what is the meaning of life, which is why his book is called Our Search for Meaning. Because once you've decided that life is meaningless and there is no hope, got news for you, that's the day that you run into the wire. Or that you point the gun to your brain. You know, suicide results when we no longer find the meaning in life or the hope to be able to continue. So Viktor Frankl simply provides another tool in the toolbox for us to be able to understand what are human beings really like. Viktor Frankl says, let me tell you in my experience that this is what human beings are like. In my experience in the concentration camp, you could take everything away from me, but you couldn't take away from me my freedom. So that when you said, there's a possibility to escape, are you going or not? I had to choose that myself, and I was the only person who could choose that. And I was responsible for my decision. If I decided to run for that escape, sorry, I chose to do that myself. If I chose to stay, I chose it myself. I made my own decision. I was free. You put a gun to my head and tell me I have to do something? I am sorry, but I am still free to do it or not to do it.